Hello biologists, welcome back. This is chapter 15, the digestive system and nutrition. We're going to focus in lecture on the digestive system and in lab on nutrition. So this chapter, we're going to hit the gastrointestinal tract. So we'll look at the parts of the digestive system, the processes that occur here, and then we'll go through in the specialized compartments for food processing, the organs one by one and how they help us do the processes of the digestive system. And then we'll look briefly at nutrition. Okay, so gastrointestinal tract functions. We break down food into smaller pieces that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. So this is a good point for review of organic molecules. So organic molecules, there are 4 types: carbohydrates or sugar, lipids or fats, proteins, and nucleic acids, the DNA, RNA. So these are all large, they've got a carbon backbone, right? So if you remember, there are monomers, the single individuals, like a monomer of carbohydrate could be glucose. And proteins, it would be amino acids. So our organic molecules are big, they're polymers. So like glycogen is glucose attached to glucose, attached to glucose, attached to glucose, attached to glucose in this long, long chain. That's too big to be absorbed, to be taken into the rest of our body. So what we do in our digestive system is we break these pieces down until we can use enzymes to break bonds. So we'll take enzymes and break those each into individual pieces that are small enough to be absorbed. So let's look at these processes a little bit more. So 6 processes. First, ingestion, eating, taking food in. Now, mechanical breakdown is the physical breakdown of this big ball of food, the mixture. We're not breaking bonds yet, we're just taking the pieces of food and breaking them into smaller parts. Physical breakdown. Propulsion, propelling that food along our GI tract. GI tract. Digestion. Now this is what we're talking about with enzymes. So in digestion, you use enzymes to break bonds, to break those organic molecules into their monomers, the small pieces that we can absorb. Enzymes break bonds. Absorption. So we have this hollow tube that's basically open to the outside from our mouth to our anus, right? It's not, it's like a slide through, I guess you could say. And as things come in, they go out the other side. Unless we absorb them, unless we take them from that hollow tube and bring them into the rest of the body, into the blood flow. And then defecation is the elimination of indigestible wastes, removing wastes through our anus. So now let's look at the parts. 2 sections of our digestive system. We've got the GI tract and all of these organs along it. And then we've got accessory structures that aren't that, but their secretions are going to help us do the jobs of the digestive system. So the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, alimentary canal, hollow tube, mouth to anus. So it goes mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. And that has a lumen or space that food moves through. And then the accessory glands, the big ones, liver makes bile to help us break down fats. Gallbladder helps store that bile. gallbladder, and the pancreas. Pancreas. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to start at the beginning of the GI tract, go through what happens in each of the parts. So first let's talk about the functions of the mouth, and we're going to talk about it based on these 6 processes. So we're going to come back to this several times. You can pretty much guarantee test questions on this part. So functions of the mouth. Do we do ingestion? Yes, this is where we take food in. First process done. Do we do mechanical breakdown? Yes. Our teeth are going to help break down food, physically crushing it. We're going to have our tongue help move that food around to shape it. You can write details on each of these as we talk about them. Propulsion, yeah, we're going to swallow. We'll look at the steps of that. Move that food back into the pharynx. Absorption, you can absorb some drugs, like tobacco, nicotine can be absorbed there. But for the most part, we're not going to do a lot of absorption. You will have salivary amylase that helps break down sugars. So you're going to actually start digestion of sugars in your mouth. And then defecation, nope, not here. So let's look more in depth at the mouth and how we do these. So first, our teeth are really important for mechanical breakdown, breaking those parts into smaller pieces. Got different teeth with different functions. What's really cool is they can look at teeth from fossils or really old parts, and based on how the parts of the teeth are and the lines on them, they can tell what kinds of foods those individuals ate. Pretty cool. Okay. Some imbalances. Tooth decay. So bacteria help break down our food. They produce acid. That acid erodes our teeth, our enamel, which is the hardest structure in your body. It's made out of this thing called hypoxite. Really interesting, there is what's called a biofilm, a film of life on our teeth. And it's all these different types of bacteria that form this whole colony, this whole community of different types of bacteria that it's harder to get rid of than any individuals, which makes brushing well important. It also means that you'll have to use mouthwash if you want to kill all of them. I'm covering up the gingivitis. And then gingivitis is inflammation of your gingiva or your gums. It can develop into periodontitis. Your periodontal ligament is what basically holds your teeth to your gums. And so if the gingivitis, the inflammation here, gets bad enough, you'll have that ligament get inflamed. It can cause the teeth to get loose. Generally not ideal. Okay. Next, salivary glands. So there's 2 types of salivary glands. There's intrinsic inside your mouth, and there's these extrinsic salivary glands that are active when we're eating. So the intrinsic are active all the time. Saliva helps moisten our mouth, helps move things through, cleans it out. But when we eat, we need more so that we can moisten the food and help us make that bolus, that mound that we swallow. If you try to eat a bunch of crackers at once, it's hard to do because you don't have enough water. You can't swallow it, right? And these can get activated just by thinking about food. So if you think about a juicy steak and you really like steaks, you'll start watering. Okay. So we've done our mouth, the extrinsic salivary glands, and now let's go into the pharynx. We saw this in the respiratory system because this is where we split up air and food. Right? So in the respiratory system, it would move air goes in the front to the trachea, and when we swallow, the epiglottis covers up the space, the glottis in our larynx, and food is going to go back into the esophagus. So what happens when we swallow? Our tongue is going to help us voluntarily. You think about that? Involuntary reflex when we swallow. Our soft palate at the end, the dangly part, is called the uvula. That's going to go back and block food from going into the nasal cavity. And then that epiglottis covers the glottis. So there's only one route food can take. If you're laughing and your uvula moves, you can get things in your nose, right? And if you're having a weird, like a lung thing, this can open and you can get things, goes around down the wrong pipe, right? So our pharynx leads to the esophagus. So not a lot going on here. It's just for propulsion, right? And that is going to be a muscular tube that helps contract. And you're going to see these contractions go in order, from superior to inferior. That contraction in that order is called peristalsis. Right? So here it starts at the top and goes down. The other type of contraction you can have, not in the esophagus, but in our intestines, is segmentation, where you'll have different parts contract, and that'll help mix things up more. And so our esophagus is going to lead to the stomach. We've got this really thick cardial sphincter, or gastroesophageal sphincter. Really thick, smooth muscle. If we were doing fetal pig dissections, you would be able to feel it. The other end, the other sphincter is even bigger. And that's going to prevent backflow of stomach acid into the esophagus. If stomach acid does enter, it's called heartburn. Things that can make that worse, more pressure on the stomach, so like during pregnancy. You can also have what's called a hernia, where a hernia is when something's in the wrong spot, where it's not supposed to be. So if your stomach's supposed to be like this, and part of it ends up getting pushed through the diaphragm, then when the diaphragm breathes, it puts pressure, and then you'll get heartburn. Okay. Moving on along on our way to the stomach. So the stomach is a J-shaped organ. 3 layers of smooth muscle really start to help us do that physical breakdown, the mechanical digestion of food. Not the chemical, though. The chemical is going to be those enzymes. Right? The stomach, when it's not full, there's all these little folds in there called rugae, and then as it expands, it smooths out. So it functions, it helps stores food, regulates its release into the small intestine, it liquefies the food. Stomach acid we're going to look at. The stomach secretions have a lot of functions. As it mixes with the food, we don't call it food anymore, we call it chyme. Cool. And then we're going to do some physical digestion of proteins using our chemical enzymes. So our stomach lining has all of these pits called gastric glands, and along those are different types of cells, and those cells are all specialized for different secretions. Some cells here are going to secrete hydrochloric acid. Stomach juices have a pH of about 2. It's very acidic. I'm sure you must be worried, how do we not break down our stomach lining all the time? Well, we do. These epithelial cells are the ones we replace the most. But you're going to have mucus that helps protect the stomach lining so it doesn't break down too fast. And that'll be a little bit basic to help neutralize the acid. And so that acid is going to help us in a couple ways. It's going to kill things there that have survived, like bacteria, pathogens. It's also going to break down the connective tissue to make it easier to digest and absorb. And it also activates pepsinogen. Pepsinogen are released by these other cells, and when it comes in contact with acid, or more pepsin, it becomes pepsin. And pepsin breaks down proteins. It's an enzyme. It's one of the few that doesn't end in ACE.